right, welcome back, everybody. We are here today with Hunter Albright of Curve10 and CU faculty member at Leeds School of Business. Thanks, Hunter, for joining us to talk about why finance is exciting for blockchain.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get started. Many of our hackathon participants have been asking us, why finance? Like, why are you starting with finance? Is it that narrow? Do we have to work on credit scores or in the financial space? We believe, of course, here at Consensys Labs that we picked finance as basically a jumping off point because we think finance is such a great place to start disrupting innovation broadly. And I know you share that view with us. Can you kind of talk to that a little bit? Just tell us why you think finance tends to be an exciting place to start experimenting with Web3.
I'd be happy to. So I'm super excited about sort of the finance and the innovation that you guys are encouraging in the area. I've spent my better part of 20 years plus of my career in finance, initially building risk models and doing predictive models for marketing to running credit card and loan portfolios, sort of around the world. And for me, there's so many of the technologies that are in finance that just haven't been disrupted or reinvented in over 50 years. So it's a space that is ripe for advancement and disruption and improvement. But it's a space where it touches us all. It touches sort of businesses, it touches consumers, and I think there's a really great enabler in the finance space at sort of the most basic level, and that's a transaction. And if we really can build technologies where people are confident in executing transactions, they trust the transactions, and they can easily be integrated into different applications, then that's the grease that will really start to grow a lot of other successful use cases within the general space. And so, in addition to that, once you get the transaction going, it has huge numbers of people that it can impact. It has huge industries that it can change. And, it will be exciting to be a part of. I think in many respects that it is the unbanked where that in sort of third world countries and around the world, and people don't have access to general banking, that there could be a real groundswell and an increased speed in terms of the rate of change and what applications are adopted. And then on the back of that, we can start to integrate things into sort of things that we see in the US or we see in Europe or we see in more developed countries, because we've solved the transaction problem. We've solved, how do I pay you for something at a peer-to-peer level, and how do I sort of pay employees at a closely held business, and how do I make a loan, and how do I do credit scoring where there's not a centralized body that's collecting that credit score. And so I think there's so many things that bridge off sort of finance. The other thing that we haven't talked about, but it's related, is how do I take ownership of my own data? And how do I authorize people to use that data for very specific applications? And for me, as soon as we learn to do that with finance, that will change how people view smart contracts and the sort of Web3 applications in general, and encourage more people to give them a go.
I love that. And you kind of like segued perfectly into my next question, which was essentially like, after finance, what? And it seems like you've already sort of in the headspace of data, of identity, of ownership as like something that a person has. Is that sort of where you see it going, or do you see multiple branching off? Like, what is next whenever we start thinking about disrupting, like what industries?
So there's a couple dimensions that I tend to think about it. One is there's all the things that we transact today that have the potential to change, and both in terms of data ownership and sort of payment. But a couple of the area, and so that that can change how we pay for real estate. That can change how we pay for how we get loans, how we finance things, how we go in with other people to invest in something that we weren't able to invest in. But the other area that I find fascinating and super exciting is, because of the ability to have fractional payments and have sort of machine to machine contracts on things, we can look at sort of all the micro payments. So how about paying for insurance for only when you drive your car, even if it's for a minute, right? Or paying for an Uber based on the number of minutes and seconds that you're in it, or getting paid for the work you do at that level and getting paid in real time, as opposed to once a month or once every 2 weeks. So again, if we go back, I really think that as soon as we change and we unlock the innovation at the transaction level, and we solve some of the innovation that's required at the user interface and the key management levels, that all of a sudden almost those three puzzle pieces start to really bring in more users for lots of interesting use cases, which then I think take us on to solving some of the more technical problems.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you've mentioned is kind of this concept of like the unbanked and some of the people that are on the fringes of, one of the things you said about finance is it kind of touches us all, but then you kind of talked about the unbanked as well. And one thing that comes to mind for me, especially living here in Colorado, is that you don't have to go very far to find unbanked populations, businesses, and here in Colorado. I mean, even like cannabis is an industry that is unbanked at large, right? Like, so can you speak to that a little bit in terms of just some ideation and places potentially to experiment with these unbanked populations without having to go, for example, to the other side of the earth to get information?
So I think there's areas to experiment in terms of just cash transactions today, and whether we could sort of displace cash and you could get people to operate in that space, because for the unbanked, they're basically in a completely cash economy. So a lot of those learnings could take place, and that is, to your point, that's exactly largely what's happening in cannabis. I think the other thing that you could, relate to from a cannabis perspective is right now it's super hard unless you are basically an angel investor or investing in directly in a VC. You're not able to invest in cannabis. And so by the time a lot of those companies go public, the majority of us will have missed out on that opportunity. And so thinking about the ways that sort of the, security tokens and other, sort of cryptocurrency investment applications are opening up the window to do that. It's sort of a different, another way we can start to think about it. And then there's the lending. I think that will be another one where micro lending applications could be developed and tested closer to home, in terms of people wanting to finance food trucks or finance sort of really low cost sort of business ideas, and even pop-up stores that might be a limited time span. Gives us lots of interesting use cases where we don't have to think about sort of going halfway around the world.
I love that. That's fantastic. Do you have any resources, like as when we're kind of talk through financing and sort of like the branching of all of the different sort of industries that it touches? Do you have resources if people are curious to continue reading on?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share some resources and some other links of where I think there's some great articles that people can go and take a look at.
Fantastic. So if you, I will just include that at the bottom of the description. That sounds
fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, Hunter, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us about finance. I know we're getting back together next week or even later this week to do a couple more talks about remote teams and other topics specifically around finance and blockchain and Web3. We're so grateful for all your guidance and help with not only this hackathon, but the evergreen content we're planning to upload. So thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
No, you're very welcome. It's been a great time. Thank you, guys.
Bye.